been at an organization and had this conversation where you're trying to advocate for something to be changed, something to be made more accessible, and it comes down to this final conversation with someone where they say,
"I'm sorry, I just don't see how it's necessary to make such a big change for one person."
At this point in the conversation, a lot of awareness-based disability advocates would encourage you to talk about the curb cut effect, which basically sums down to this idea that when you make things accessible for one group, especially the most marginalized group, then you're making things better for everybody, referencing the spot on sidewalks that's cut so that people with wheelchairs, people who might struggle with steps, all of that can go on to the next sidewalk. Record to show that I have absolutely nothing against the curb cut effect. It's a very important conversation to have, especially in workplaces. However, I think encouraging young advocates to talk about the curb cut effect without equipping them with the history around it really harms young advocates, newly disabled individuals when it comes to advocating for themselves and others. So today we're going to talk about the truth behind the curb cut effect. If you're new here, hi, my name is Isa and I'm a disabled writer and advocate with a master's degree in communication studies with a focus in disability, culture, and identity. On this channel, I talk a lot about disability identity and history and culture, and I also share my experience and basically try to equip people with disabilities the ways that I wish I had been equipped as a young adult with a disability. One of the first things that pops up on my Google search when I look up the curb cut effect is from the National Cancer Institute that says, the curb cut effect describes how addressing disadvantages or exclusions experienced by one group or people creates an environment that enables everyone to participate and contribute fully. So specifically focusing on institutionalized spaces that create that marginalizations. When we focused on the people who are most marginalized, we're able to make things better for everyone. We see that a lot through these cute little images of people using strollers, people who have pushing barrels, people who are walking with canes, just lots of different types of people who are benefited from curb cuts. It's not just people who use wheelchairs. And with the case of a lot of disability advocacy history that's easily available, so much of it's going to focus on disabled veterans who returned from World War II specifically and the following wars and came back to a very inaccessible environment. There was a lot of restructuring of the way that we view disability. There's a lot of medical technology that was being developed because of the war that made it possible for veterans to come back home just disabled. And one person who doesn't really get talked out a lot about is Jack Fisher, who lobbied in Michigan to get curb cuts installed in Michigan in 1945. I want to point out that a lot of these articles talking about the history of the curb cut and a lot of disability advocacy in general kind of paint with broad strokes disability advocacy, painting this idea that non-disabled and disabled individuals work together in order to make the world better and to make it more accessible, and that it was just through the structured lobbying, structured awareness campaigns, all of these things that we were able to instigate change. And the reality is actually far from the truth there. I just think the coolest parts of this are the things that we don't talk about. So let me tell you about Ed Roberts. So Ed Roberts survived polio when he was 14. And because of that, he was severely disabled. He was actually the first severely disabled person to attend UC Berkeley. So he and a whole bunch of his friends who were also people with disabilities decided at night to go through Berkeley and start demolishing sidewalks and creating their own curb cuts. All the while really advocating for the United States federal government, this is the big thing, for the federal government to step in and create protections for people with disabilities in order to create more accessible spaces for them. The work done at UC Berkeley actually helped lead to the 1968 Architecture Barriers Act, which was very foundational to the 1990s Americans with Disabilities Act. Here's the thing. Our advocacy has been largely disruptive. If you look at the 504 sit-in, which is considered one of the most successful sit-ins, it is certainly the longest one to occur in the United States. For 25 days, 150 disabled individuals and their allies occupied a government building. They did not leave. They were supported by the Black Panther Party, who helped provide food and resources for them. There were support swapping. I've talked about this previously in a video. I just think this stuff is really cool. If we look at the Capitol Crawl was organized by disabled advocates, and it took an image of an 8-year-old girl, Jennifer Keelan, to climb up the steps of the Capitol. And that's largely attributed by a lot of conversations and news that they took pictures and videos of this little girl climbing the steps of the Capitol to people starting to care about the Americans with Disability Act. I just want to break this down for you specifically, is that there were 8-year-olds every single day who could not access buildings. But it took an 8-year-old child going up the steps of the Capitol and having that recorded by all of these newscasters. It wasn't all of the other disabled people. It was focusing on this one child for people to see as a rallying cry, ignoring all of the advocacy that had been happening for years before, that people decided that was their moment, that they were going to stand up, which thank God that they did. I am so thankful for the ADA, but that doesn't change the fact that it took everything to come up to this point. If you take nothing else away from this video, I want you to listen closely to this, because accessibility is not some gift that non-disabled individuals provide you because it's not too inconvenient for them to do that. Accessibility is not a reward for good behavior. Accessibility is a right that is continually denied to people with disabilities, especially people with marginalized identities, with intersecting marginalized identities. So let's try to quickly put this in the context of the world that we live in today. We live in a world that tries to pretend that we are post-COVID, that it ignores the fact that we lived through a massively disabling event, and that we are seeing pressures on our systems that were kind of band-aided in response to the ADA instead of making the radical changes that they need to, because it was too inconvenient. It wasn't necessary for the single disabled person who's supposed to occupy that space. So let's go back to that conversation. You're in an organization, you need an accommodation, you want an accommodation because it would make life easier for you, it would make it more equitable, because then you wouldn't have to work as hard or buy this tool to make it accommodating or to do this, that spaces should be accessible. You tell them about the curb cut effect, that it would benefit everybody, but you also remember that it benefiting you is just valid enough of a reason to keep on advocating, that you are an important member of our society, you are an important member of our community, and you inconveniencing other occupying that space is a reflection of the way the space was designed, not your worth as a person, because you are needed in our spaces. You are needed in our spaces. Please don't ever forget that. So if you want a weird, I don't know what that was. I just got super passionate about it. But please like and subscribe. I believe in the future of our young disabled people, of our newly disabled individuals, of people who grew up disabled. We are on the precipice of change in the disability community, and we need to embrace it and go for it and listen to our disabled elders and listen to those with intersectional identities who've done the work and other communities who are continuing to do the work. And remember that the curb cut effect means that we focus on the most marginalized, and it makes our lives better for everyone. And we especially remember that in the disability community. So hope you guys have a wonderful week. Thank you for bearing with me. I will see you guys next week. Bye.